Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. Each week, Matt, Kurt, Jerry, and the occasional special guest explore how the trauma-informed paradigm challenges traditional beliefs and approaches concerning a wide variety of areas. This podcast addresses psychological trauma in an educational manner and is not designed to replace mental health treatment. If anything in this podcast makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, please talk to a mental health professional.
Welcome, friends, to episode 88 of the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm back here with Jerry today, continuing our big idea series of the summer. Today, we have an interesting topic, reciprocity, a word I'm trying to say correctly. So I practiced it a few times beforehand. I think I got it. So I think there's some interesting insight. Again, if you're just joining us maybe for the first time in this series, we're using John Haidt's book, The Happiness Hypothesis, and going through chapter of his book that compares sort of traditional wisdom thinking with modern science. And then we're putting the trauma-informed lens on it as well. If you're not reading the book, don't worry. We'll catch you up, and so you won't feel too lost. So as always, we start out with the bright, shiny object of the week. I've got a new little thing I'm doing, Jerry. For the folks on video, I'll put it on for you. It's my blue light blocking glasses. So as someone who, if you're just listening to this, I put on, the best I can describe these are kind of the things that Bono wears from U2 all the time. So they're red tinted, and what they're designed to do is block out the blue light from computer screens to hopefully help you get some sort of normal sleep pattern. So I've been using them for about a week. I seem to be more tired when I go to bed. I still don't know if they're really impacting my sleep quality. But once again, my wife thinks I'm crazy. So anytime I can get my wife thinking I'm nuts or just the biggest nerd in the world, I always take that as a win. So, yeah, we got a lot of, the research is showing that blue light, even from televisions, is pretty devastating for our sleep patterns, and I'm not the best sleeper anyway. So I'm testing it out. So far, I'd say it's maybe worth the 20-some bucks I spent on it, but I'll give you an update to see if it's something that makes it to my face each night, or if it's just one of those other things I bought, try for 2 weeks, and then forget about somewhere in a drawer. So that's my latest attempt to be a good sleeper. Jerry, what are you thinking about this week?
I have two things on my mind today. One is, we're watching my grandchildren this week, and when you do it, you've got to always find activities to engage in. So last night, we took them to our community park, Clement Park, and they have a concert night at the park, free concert. So there's a local band. They were actually fairly good, but not super good. But what I observed in the audience is the power of music.
Yeah. And
really, here's these really kind of conservative people who go to work every day, and you play music and they're up dancing and they're moving and people are in good moods. And I think that this concept of pattern rhythmic stimulation really gets us in a state in which we can socially engage. And I want to kind of really talk at some time, have some discussion around how we could use that in our approach to working with our clients. Is in some ways, music kind of bypasses all of our defenses and allows us to kind of show up.
Yeah.
So it was really nice to be in the park, but as a traumatologist, I go to the park and I watch different things than most people kind of watch. The other thing is I wanted to kind of just recognize there's a woman here in Colorado who headed up, Johnathan headed up early childhood for many years, is leaving the state to kind of pursue another career, and really want to recognize her efforts to kind of create a strategic plan and really move the state to recognizing and investing in early childhood mental health. Her efforts really set the groundwork for whoever's coming in to kind of move it to another. But she's an incredible visionary who kind of helps see that investing early in children, in families, really pays off strong dividends in the long run. So I want to kind of wish her good luck as she kind of pursues a different aspect of finding a way to be creative.
Great. And thanks for all the work she's done for our state as well. So some great initiatives out of that. So I love this chapter. I'm listening to on audiobook form. It's a really great audiobook. And I love, it starts out with Reciprocity of that famous scene, beginning scene to the first Godfather movie where the Undertaker comes in and wants justice, and just how awesome that scene is about reciprocity, and how if I do this for you, Jerry, and I come and ask you for a favor later, you owe me that favor. And I think it's a short chapter. It's an interesting one. And I think one that might not initially lead itself to the trauma-informed lens, but I think we can, there were some thoughts that I had. And one with reciprocity is a lot of times, well, I do a lot of thinking, especially in my self-care trainings, about the why we enter this field in the first place. And some of this, I think for at least me, I think when I went through hard times in my own life, that there were people, professionals that were there for me. And I think it wasn't the only reason I got pulled to psychology and the helping professions, but there was something about me feeling after I kind of went through my healing journey of wanting to give back. So with the reciprocity, I just find it interesting for a little bit of self-reflection for us is, the concept of when we get something, we want to give back, and sort of this fair exchange that seems to be somewhat inherent in the animal kingdom, especially with mammals, that if I spend some time as a baboon grooming you, the expectation is you'll spend some time grooming me. I like the bats who, if one bat had a good night hunting and another bat didn't, that bat would share the food. And Johnathan Haidt, he really doesn't take a humanistic kind of view of it. He says the bats do that only because when the bat that had a successful night has an unsuccessful night, that bat would hope that the person would reciprocate that charity. So I the sense of fairness, the sense of give and take, he uses tit for tat. I know, at least when I look at my own sort of journey to dedicating my professional life to really the service of others, I can see a little bit of reciprocity in my own, is that I got a huge gift from when I was struggling. And I think part of it was just like, how cool would it be to be in a job where I could be a small part of others' journey as well. So Jerry, I just kind of wonder, as you read this chapter, did you have any thoughts about, what brings folks to our field, the ability to give back, and maybe even a little bit if this played into any of your own kind of career choices over the years?
Well, a couple of things I had is that, he's very genetically geared, right? And there's certainly a genetic component to this. But when I think about people like Gandhi or Mandela or the Dalai Lama, who in some ways rise above the tit for tat kind of model, it tells us that we're not really always driven by our genetic responses, right? And so in a way, we have to be able to find other motivations other than what drives us is our need for reciprocity, right? Because in a way, we're not working with people who always treat us really nicely,
Right.
right? It's like they don't always say thank you when you're doing something, to kind of look at that.
Yep.
How do you, as a helper, which in some ways, always, I believe, in some ways, we come into the world, and when we're given good care, we have the capacity to give good care, right? When something happens to disrupt that, it makes it challenging to really be open to spontaneously interacting and having these positive interactions. So I think that there's some real basis that reciprocity plays in our development.
Yeah.
But our brains are not stimulus bound, right? And so we can make different decisions. So, oftentimes I think trauma-informed care is really about, in some ways, being mindful about this tit for tat piece. Is that not responding in a violent way?
Yeah.
Not responding with that email that says, you know what, you just sent me a nasty email, I'm going to send you a nasty email.
Yeah.
It really is, how do we make a commitment to be nonviolent?
Yeah.
Which is not, in some ways, based on what he's saying, not our natural state.
Yeah.
Right? So,
ooh, I love that.
I think that this trauma-informed is really, in some ways, challenging this kind of instinctual desire to do to others as they've done to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, oh, I love that insight. Yeah.
So I'd like to hear from you about how this, when you said is how this fits into trauma-informed, is really trauma-informed is being mindful of those impulses.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, we talked a lot about in our leadership series about that emotional labor piece of kind of restraining, and boy, this fits in really well with what you just said, bringing these two together. Brilliant statement is like how we don't respond a lot of times when we're met with anger, frustration, even if we see it unjustified, we meet that with empathy and compassion. And again, that's not, like you said, if he's right and that's an ingrained, we should respond back with the same anger and frustration, and why that is so difficult and draining a lot of times. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that when we talk about, maybe the helping profession somewhat in general, and I think maybe this is sort of why it's such a struggle for people sometimes to say, yeah, someone experiencing homelessness needs help, because what are we getting back for that, right? What are they giving me if I give this to them? And I think, every day, so many people that listen to the podcast, I know, try to rise above that piece. And I mean, I think you can make a nerdy argument that, hey, your paycheck is the tax, so to speak, is you don't get that necessarily from there, but we don't get paid like we should either. So even that, I think is like, yeah, this is your job. Well, it's your job to go against maybe your ingrained habitual ways of responding. Doesn't always, I don't think that's not really works scientifically is. And so I think that this is why, when you look at the statistics of burnout and everything, we're really maybe fighting what he talks about as this natural ingrained kind of tit for tat reaction to folks. And the economic folks, behavioral economic folks have measured this in all kinds of different games that if someone's generous to us, we're generous to them. And if someone kind of screws us, we're going to get back at them. So we've gotten a lot of this nice proof that our natural way of responding is to this tit-to-tat thing. And like you said, I think we try to override that each and every day. And I think that can explain a lot of the emotional labor and toll that this job plays in on us. I think that's an amazing insight. And do you have any thoughts about, like, is there a way to do that strategically? I mean, is there a way, how do we keep ourselves alert to that? Because I just think how you put it puts it in a great perspective, like knowledge wise, but like, man, that's a lot to hold on to every day. Is there a way that you've been able to, when you're met with frustration, anger, disrespect sometimes, is there a way you keep yourself healthy in that and keep giving that empathy, compassion, and keep yourself in that right mindset?
You know, I think that that's an interesting question, because I have a story, but based on what we know, sometimes the story is an explanation for what's happening, right? The narrative doesn't necessarily. But what I have found is the way I frame what I'm doing, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that my job, as you would put it, is in some ways to see you and what you're doing as your way to manage your pain. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when I have an internal narrative that reframes or redefines what's happening between us, that you're not really screaming at me and you're not really angry at me, is you're really protecting yourself from your own internal pain. Yeah. Right? And when I can have compassion, I'm able to kind of respond to those experiences differently. Mm-hmm. Right? And so in a way, having a framework in my head to help me understand what's going on in a different way, as opposed to I'm at the supermarket and you just cut in front of me, and now I have this impulse, and it's like, wait a second, here I'm not supposed to be compassionate for doing it, right? When I'm in this kind of relationship, although I try to be compassionate, it's not, but in this relationship, I'm somewhat different, right? I have a different understanding of my roles and responsibilities, similar to the fact that when I'm a parent to the child, and the parent, this kid reaches up and grabs my nose and pulls it, right? My impulse is to get angry to do it, but I think, wow, you know, my role to this child is to help them manage that and kind of do it. Yeah. So I think we have this ability to use using his analogy, the rider, to reframe things for the elephant. Mm-hmm. It allows me to kind of integrate that and respond in a different way than my impulses are doing.
Yeah, so and just to catch everybody up, if you didn't listen to the first one, so the rider representing the intellectual part of our brain and self, and the elephant being the emotional side, which if the emotional side gets agitated, it's just going to run away with the rider on top of it. And so what I love about that too is, okay, so here we are, somebody's yelling at us, right? Our natural response is to yell back, right? That's the tit for tat. So we've got to have a rider strong enough to, in that moment, to calm our elephant and say, okay, this person's not really yelling at me. They're yelling at me, but there's something behind this behavior that I should not take personally. And then, so at the same time, the rider is calming the elephant down. But here's the amazing thing we do, Jerry, if you think about this analogy, we're not allowing our elephant or our emotions to respond tit for tat, but we're meeting frustration, anger with compassion and empathy, right? So our elephant is responding so we're preventing it from responding in its natural way. We're almost then forcing is not the right word, but encouraging or somehow getting it to respond in the opposite way. Does that make sense? So someone yells at us, we should yell back, but we cognitively catch ourselves, we understand the behavior, and we respond in the exact opposite way of our genetic programming. That's pretty freaking cool when you think about it that way.
I don't know that responding in violence is natural, or responding in compassion is not natural.
Yeah.
I think that we evolved to live in social groups. And when we feel safe and we feel resourced, we can respond in a way that allows us to, in some ways, be the helper, right? And so the issue isn't one is natural and one is not, is that our brains developed in cooperative social environments.
Yeah.
Right? And so, in a way, how do I reframe in my brain that this is not my enemy?
Right.
Right? If this is not my enemy, then being cooperative and compassionate is my natural state.
Yeah.
If I see this person as a threat and to doing it, then I'm going to respond in a defensive, protective way.
Yeah.
When we say natural and unnatural, is that I believe our natural place is really to be socially engaged. That our natural place is to be able to co-regulate each other's emotional responses.
Yeah.
This person who comes in because of the violence that they were exposed to, or the lack of resources that they have, I believe they're not responding in an unnatural. They're just in a state that they feel like they have to protect themselves. I have to get in a place where I don't feel a need to see this as a threat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if it's not a threat, then my natural response is compassion and love.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I mean,
in the store, I have to spontaneously, how do I see the guy cutting in front of me as not an enemy?
Well,
right?
yeah. I had a very similar experience where I was the guy cutting in front. I was trying to drive in central Pennsylvania this week, and the Harrisburg area seems to have interstates that turn into stoplights very quickly, and I cut someone off. I thought the lane was going to keep going. I did it. I waved, but who knows what a wave is. But I did have this interesting thought. The guy he didn't flip me off. He was upset with me, and he should have been. I was the guy cutting in front of the line at the grocery store. I did have some appreciation though that he didn't kill me. Because I watch my dogs, and again, human beings and dogs are different, but we get a lot of our scientific research from brains a lot smaller than are in our dogs, with mice and other things. But if I'm on a walk with my dog and another dog does something wrong, right? Now again, I never let my dogs get too close to other dogs because they weigh a lot of them and they can hurt other dogs. But it's my dog's ready to kill the other dog, right? There's no let me have this cognitive compassion. So even someone, when I cut that person off, who wasn't necessarily, I wasn't one of in their us, because I was from out of town, this, that, there, didn't know me. Again, there was that kind of break where, I was angry, but that's all I did. He was angry for a second, then he let it go. So I think that there's kind of those twofold is sometimes I want to believe that our natural state is compassion and empathy. Unfortunately, I also see sometimes that I don't see a lot of that in our society a lot of times. And I think part of that is the them and us. But I wonder with his research showing, because some of it I think leads to that, but others is we get into our individual perspective of what is fair really quickly as well. So I wonder if things seem fair, if then we bring it, but if things seem unfair, then we get reactive. I don't know. It's a tough question. I'm struggling with it a little bit.
Our survival depended on us being able to work cooperatively and reciprocally and with other human beings. Our survival depended on us forming these small social clans to be able to survive,
Mhm.
right? At the same time, the largest threat to those clans were other human beings,
Yeah.
right? So in our brains, our stress response is connected to our reward centers,
Mhm.
which is in some ways connected to this higher part of our brain, right? So social engagement, reward, and stress are connected,
Mhm.
right? So in a way, that guy didn't escalate because you said, "Oh, I cut him off and I deserve this and I could do it." If you would have rolled down your window and started screaming back at that guy,
Yeah.
his stress response would have went up.
Yeah.
His ability, right? And so in human beings, all of these things are connected. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, there's a natural part to be defensive and protective and see people as threats,
Mhm.
but there's also a natural part to be cooperative and loving.
Yeah.
But they're related, right?
Yeah.
And so if in a way, if I respond to somebody who's angry at me because they're activating my stress response with a defensive manner, I'm going to put them into a more defensive state,
Yeah.
right? But if I have this framing in my brain that allows me to not see this person, whether it's true or it's not, if that allows me to stay socially engaged and not move into a defensive place, I'm able to help through my facial expressions, through my body, through the tone of my voice, to help re-regulate this person,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So that we have to realize is that, yes, we have this kind of defensive, primitive kind of place that we go to that defends ourselves. But we've also developed, if you think about this ventral vagal system that is spontaneously uses social engagement as a regulatory code, that is also a natural place.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the brain develops based on pattern repetitive use, if my experience is the social engagement system had a lot of repetitions of seeing other human beings as safe and to do it, that rider becomes stronger and
Yeah.
social engagement. If
Yeah.
my system of stress has been much more activated growing up, and in my world that I have to, my survival depends on that other people are potentially threats and they're going to take my limited resources and doing it, then my stress system becomes more activated.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to help people working in the helping field stay socially engaged,
Yeah.
stay socially connected, and that to see relational interactions as rewarding,
Mhm.
right? To kind of looking at that piece. And so when we look at creating a trauma-informed environment, it's really is, how do we create a healthy relational environment that strengthens our social engagement systems,
Right.
that allow us to go into the room and not react
Yeah.
to the person cutting us off as they're doing it because their intention is they want to get ahead.
Yeah.
You're doing it because you're lost or you made a mistake, right? If I have a different explanation for your behavior, it allows me to stay socially engaged with you,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right? And so how do you create the optimal therapeutic, not just in that therapy session, but in your organization to maximize our social engagement capacity?
Yeah. Yeah. Because when there is that breakdown, and I see this in way too many, and I've experienced this myself in organizations, is, we talk about, and I'm careful always with the word trauma, but the idea of trauma bonding, where there's such a break in the organization where there is now a them versus us sort of mentality within the staff. Usually it's supervisors with direct care staff or something like that. But, I think that real focus that the model, and I'm really, the more I see the research, the more the model of the supervisor, again, supervisee relationship is going to really give that emotional, social safety needed to continue to engage. And the level of support and self-care we need to focus on is so crucial to keeping ourselves healthy and keeping our rider and our elephant where it needs to be. Because we're really talking about both balancing that cognitive, keeping our mindset trauma informed, right? Keeping that lens on the behavior we see, and then strategically meeting maybe anger and frustration with love and compassion. And I've been starting to do the meta guided meditation a little bit more in my daily mindfulness practice, the loving kindness it's also called. And I love the fact that part of that, and one of the reasons I started it, I like that one of the steps of that practice is to think about someone who you're not getting along with and give them loving kindness. And I think, again, it's a little bit of an unnatural thing. And usually a politician pops into my head. I will let that politician remain unnamed. But it's like the most trying person in my life is that, somebody who frustrates me most. If it's somebody I see on TV, I'm pretty damn lucky at this point in my life. But, it's like I'm going to give him or her loving kindness, right? So it is that challenge, and I love that exercise because it really sets me up when I do meet that frustration to meet it with kindness and understanding. And I think that's such an important thing for us to realize that's difficult. I think you're right. There is that natural piece once we have safety, once we have, I think if our rider's healthy and our elephants, if we're emotionally healthy and cognitively engaged, we can do that. But it doesn't take much of a bad night's sleep, a bad interaction with a coworker, maybe just 2 or 3 bad client interactions in a row where our elephant kind of gets tired and our rider kind of gets worn down, where we can go back to sort of maybe a more instinctual way or a more at least aggressive way of approaching this as well. So, Jerry, there was another question that came out of this that I'd love to get your thoughts on. I mean, I think we ran a community-based program called Family to Family together for a while when we worked at the same organization. And one of the things we thought about with that program was this idea of reciprocity. Because so often, and so often we give freely, and there's something I'm okay with that. I'm okay giving housing to someone and not because I think it's a human right and not expecting something back in return. I'm okay giving healthcare to people because I think it's a human right without expecting necessarily a return. But I wonder if we set people up in a way with a lot of our programs where they get, but they're never able to kind of reciprocate back necessarily. Sometimes a thank you is huge because we don't get a lot of those. But I just kind of wonder what you think about a lot of our services don't necessarily give people a natural way to reciprocate getting something for very little. And I'm trying to be careful with my wording here, but I think you know what I mean, is we give, and sometimes we don't give people a way to kind of give back. And I just kind of wonder what you're thinking of. I know we kind of thought about that, is if we provide rent assistance for somebody, what's a way, again, it's not necessarily a requirement they give back, but what it would be an outlet to give back if they were interested in that. I just kind of wonder what your thoughts about reciprocity when we think about people that are getting a lot of services and they're just trying to survive, but there's not kind of a way to give back.
I think giving back is an important developmental step, right? And so for some individuals who really didn't get some basic needs met early, their experience of the world really is, I have to get what I want because tomorrow it won't be there, and I have to, right? And so, if you think about kind of Pierre Genet's model of these 3 stages of treatment, in which there's stabilization, there's working on trauma, and then there's future, right? Kind of thinking about that piece, to kind of look at that. Is that for our clients, oftentimes, we're trying just to stabilize things for them, to kind of look at that, right? And then we're trying to, in some ways, help them be open to being in the world in a different way and not having their trauma drive their perception of the current situation, that they could be in the here and also, right? And then kind of be able to think about the future of how they want to be in the world, to kind of look at that. And I have a kind of a story about that. And one is in our family to family, if you remember, for the people, not for the clients we served, but for the providers who came in, we had a pay it forward model, right? If we give you something, we don't necessarily want something in return, but we want you to help somebody else.
Yeah.
Kind of thinking about it, right? So that was part of our model of we're gonna resource you, and we want you to resource somebody in your community. Kind of do it. But I had a story of, I worked in a residential treatment center with really, really significantly neglected and abused children at the children's home. And it was Christmas time. And Christmas time, if you remember, at the children's home, we gave the kids a lot of toys.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that was when we wanted to kind of give them something to make up, which we never could, because they never got really what they wanted, which
right.
would have it, right? But these really neglected kids would sometimes devalue the gifts that we gave them, right? They're just not, because it kind of, they didn't want to feel connected and they didn't want to feel lost. But I remember one Christmas sitting in their kind of dorm, what they called it, or unit, what they called it, with a group of teenage girls. And we were watching TV, and there was an apartment building that burnt down in Aurora. And the story came on that all of these little kids' Christmas gifts got burnt and got destroyed in the fire. And the girls really had an emotional reaction to that, about the loss, about they started to remember having Christmases where they didn't get gifts, and they started to remember, right? But spontaneously, they came up with, they wanted to take their gifts over and donate them to this, right? And we got them together, and they drove over to the shelter and gave their Christmas gifts to them. And that was the biggest gift that they got.
That's amazing.
To be able to give those gifts away. Mm-hmm. And so your point about this issue about having the opportunity to be able to give, mm-hmm. this thought about, sometimes giving is you get more, yeah. But you can't do that until somebody has given something to you.
Yeah.
If you're in a world and feel like you've not been given things,
mm-hmm.
it's hard to give things away.
Yeah.
And the old thought is you can't love someone until you love yourself. Mm-hmm. And really underneath the reality is you can't love yourself until somebody loves you.
Yeah.
So I think that in that moment, those girls had felt like they had gotten something.
Yeah.
And so they can then give it away. Absolutely. And I think oftentimes we're asking our clients to be in a spot to give something away where they haven't felt like they've gotten enough yet.
Yeah.
So it's a developmental process where I'm giving you something today and tomorrow and the next day with the belief that at some point in this process, you'll have enough, you'll have gotten and feel like you've gotten so you can give it to somebody else.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it just really, that's a great story. I love that story about the girls in that dorm. The other side of this too, and I love, again, Joseph Campbell's model that I use a lot of times about the hero's journey, because a lot of times, if you're not familiar with it, trauma happens, suffering happens. They end up in what he calls the abyss. And then somebody, he calls it the mentor, is able to go in the abyss and help the hero in the lowest moments find that tomorrow could be better than yesterday, find worth in themselves, that they're valuable. I mean, everything that we do, I think, is really captured in this little journey. But one of his later stages is when the hero sort of goes through this transformational process, then he or she is ready and often wants to and is called to then be the mentor for folks that are now where they were before. And I work with a lot of peer advocates, a lot of folks that were in services and now are providing services. And it's such a powerful thing. And, I kind of wonder is like with the hero's journey, I think it gives a good way is these people have gone through that transformational process. So they're in some ways in a place now where they're ready to give back in a big way, including now they're ready to get back in the workforce and they choose to now be that mentor for other people who are struggling and use their personal experience and resiliency to go back in that abyss and help others find hope and worth. And I love working with these folks. But it does raise a question for me: is there little things that we can give people before the transformational or as part of the transformational process where they could give back? And I think asking people to do a copay like of $5 because, hey, if you pay that, you're more invested in some stupid way, but you may not have the $5. Like, I don't think the token kind of mentality is really effective. But, I just wonder if there's some little way, if it even makes sense to find little ways to, again, give folks, whether it's helping us clean up the grounds or just something that, that there is a way to kind of take ownership of being part of a program or being invested in something. And I don't know, I don't have a good answer to that question. It's not anywhere where I start my thinking. And I see once they're through that transformational process, they can give back. But I wonder, even earlier on in their healing process, if there isn't, sort of something that we could give folks that opportunity. And is that even worth our time to kind of think about in any way?
So that was a long, what's the question?
Is there any, have you found any little ways to, to have people give back in any way, shape, or form as part of their healing journey? Not because afterwards a lot are called back in, but as part of their healing journey from trauma and healing from trauma, is reciprocity any part of that in your thinking? It's just kind of a general question because it's not a big part of my thinking, but I just kind of wonder if you had any additional thoughts on that.
I think that giving and receiving, you have to feel safe in the relationship.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people who have been hurt and as a way to manage their pain, how to develop strategies to in some ways say that relationships aren't important to me anymore. Yeah. It's really difficult for them to give because it implies that there's a relationship now, and then I have to deal with my pain. Mm-hmm. And I realize that, and it doesn't mean because I don't give, I don't have a relationship, but it's a defense, right?
Yeah.
So 9/11, do you remember 9/11? Were you with us at 9/11 at the Children's Home?
No, I wasn't. It was before.
Okay. So at 9/11, I was working with this young lady who was just a pistol. She hated me. She pushed me away. She was a really angry, hurt little girl to kind of do it. And in no way could she ever tell me that our relationship mattered.
Yeah.
And at 9/11, a lot of the kids were really, really frightened because they don't get, when they watch things on TV, that it's over there in New York. It's kind of like, right, to kind of do it.
I also didn't get that.
Right.
Yeah.
They got very frightened and scared. And we took the kids out on the field to do a little ceremony to kind of recognize that this wasn't us that got, but we were going to kind of have something to kind of recognize what had happened. And we got in this big circle around this field. And I had lost, my cousin's husband was in the World Trade Center. So I personally had lost something. And we did in this field, and I'm standing there and talking and saying, you know, I lost somebody that's away, but we're safe, but they're not safe, right? I talked openly. And this little girl, you know, she was 17, but she was a little girl.
Yeah.
She walked across the field and hugged me and ran back. Right? And ran back across the field. And for me, she wanted me to know she cared, but she couldn't tolerate it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a metaphor oftentimes for the work that we do with our clients. Yeah. Is that to ask them sometimes to demonstrate that other people mean something to them means that they have to deal with all the things that they lost in the pain and to do it. And so you have these windows in your therapy where they talk about, you know, if you think about motivational change, is that you look for change language. Yeah. That was a change language relationally that happened. Mm-hmm. But she can't stay there. So the next day she told me she hated me and we were back. But, you know, I had this moment where I know she didn't hate me.
Yeah.
But she couldn't tolerate it.
Right.
Right? To kind of look at that. And I think that that's a metaphor for when we're with our clients and they're angry and they're screaming at us and they go out, and that there's these moments where you see they're able to tolerate the relationship.
Yeah.
Or they're able to tolerate that they cared about another human being. Mm-hmm. Right? But that meant that human beings are important again, and now I've got to deal with all the pain and loss of to do it. And so by me staying in this compassionate place, but also me being vulnerable, allowed her to be able to do that. If I was this strong therapeutic person that kind of did it's too scary. But when I was vulnerable, it allowed her. So in a way, how do we create the space in our relationship not to be the one who knows everything, not to be the one who is in charge and kind of, I have the resources to give you. But there's these moments where when we're vulnerable, allows them to be the caregiver in a way, right? There was this reciprocal thing that happened and it wasn't something that we were dealing with trauma in the past. We were all dealing with the trauma at the same time. Yeah. That created a space. So in our communities, how do we create a space for these people who seem so vulnerable all the time, and they think, oh, you have it all and you know it all and you're doing it. How do we create that they're the expert at the moment?
Yeah.
Right? So that they have space to be the caregiver.
Right.
They have space to do. And I think that's a difficult thing, the way we're structured, when we're structured that we're supposed to give you your food and we're supposed to give you your housing and we're supposed to be, they look at us and think, well, what do I have to give you?
Yeah. Right.
What do I have of worth that would be of worth to you? Mm-hmm. Right? And so that's in our relationships. How do we communicate some point that I need something from you?
Yeah.
Right? When you don't show up, I missed you last week, right? Or I did, right? Without scaring them in such a way. So I think that when that happens in a therapeutic relationship or in their relationship where they're the caregiver, something important happens. Mm-hmm. Which is what you're saying is you came from being given something, you had the kind of drive to give back to somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think if we want our clients to be in a place to give, how do we, as an organization, ask what do they have of worth to give back to us?
Yeah.
That's an important component of this reciprocal. If we can find a place in our organization, whether that's you're now a peer to somebody else who's on the street, would you be helpful? Or you have something of worth that somebody else in our organization, or can you come in and just talk to us about how is this treatment process, and can you help us make our treatment better because we want to, is that you bring them in as experts.
Yep.
You create spaces for them to give something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what a wonderful way to acknowledge and appreciate. And I think, again, we talk so much in the trauma-informed arena about helping people who may have lost their sense of worth, got replaced with shame, helping them find that. And I think the ability to give back is a part of that. And if you're in survival mode, helping somebody survive and feel safe, they may not be in a place to give back, right? We got to get that safety piece, all those things you mentioned established. But then just, I think thinking that, and then maybe it's their expertise bringing them into a consumer advocacy board, or having them take a time on the board, or just even asking sort of their opinion, I think can be an incredibly powerful place, because so many people that are struggling are just told what to do every minute of every day. And then usually told they're not doing it well enough. So bringing them in that way and giving them the voice and giving them that they have an impact in some way in the school or in the organization, I think is a great insight of how people can start, again, giving really meaningful feedback, being empowered in their programming, and again, building back that sense that, hey, if all these really educated, smart people want my opinion, maybe I do have some worth to give back, not only these folks, but even to a greater extent as well.
Right. So, when I was young and I did something wrong, I got hit, and my dad would say, "This hurts me more than it does you." And it's like, what are you, crazy?
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I became a parent that I understood that.
Yeah.
Right? So asking somebody to have a perspective developmentally that exceeds their capacity to do it.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? Giving is better than receiving. Mm-hmm. Maybe in your world, not in my world, right? But at some point they have that experience that giving does get.
Yeah.
So you have to get in order to give.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important, is that I got something as a child so that I was able to give as an adult.
Awesome.
Right? So I think having expectations that people give back before they get is really not, they don't have that internal experience. So I think through our process of us giving, I think I'm at a spot in my life where when you're yelling at me, I'm okay with that because I'm getting something from this, right? Yeah. I don't expect you to go, oh, I realize the pain is more that you'll get something out of it. Later on, as I've held their experience, I've watched that they've developed the capacity to better give.
Yeah.
So I hope that, as our givers our helpers on the call today can realize is that oftentimes we're meeting people who are developmentally not ready yet. But that doesn't mean that they won't be, and it doesn't mean that having the experience that you're giving them will allow them to also give later on to kind of do it.
Awesome. Great way to wrap up. It sounds like it's about time for you to go be Grandpa Jerry.
Yes,
so
because they're up and running around, talking about giving and not getting.
Yes. So I'll let you go give. I know you get from it as well.
Okay, then.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, we'll have show notes, some discussion question videos at traumainformedlens.com. So next week, we'll continue our exploration of this big idea series. Jerry, I love exploring these topics with you. So thanks so much, and everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Okay.